In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build a transition effect to your navigation bar. I've added a underline effect, as you can see here, and for a more practical implementation, you can check out my website, matthewseaver.com, and you can see a little bit more of a toned down version of exactly what we're building today. So this is going to be useful for if you're interested in letting your users know, while it's not required by any means for your website, but it's helpful if you want to let users know that there's a clickable link. You can add this effect. But by any means, for animations, you don't need to have a lot of them to make your website look good, make your project, your business, whatever you want to build, need all these animations. But they're nice to add. So that's what we're going to work on today. And in Visual Studio Code, I've created 5 files for this project. Sandbox.html, sandbox.css. That's where we're going to be building this project. I have some notes for myself just to take note of the colors that we're going to be using. And then we have the solution that we're going to look at as well. This will be available in my GitHub, so feel free to check out a link in my description for access to that. But without further ado, we can get started. So to get started with this project, you want to do Shift !Tab to add some boilerplate HTML. We're going to say underline animation tutorial for the title, and we can see that here. We refresh, there we go, we got it same as the final solution. Okay, next we want to add the nav bar, and so we're going to use a nav element or a nav tag, and we're gonna, within the nav tag, we're gonna have an unordered list, and we're gonna have a list of links. And a list of links is consisting of a link tag and followed by an A tag, which is for a link. That's all we're building. For navigation, that essentially is what it is. From simple to complex, to some degree, it is a list of links. And you can have more complex ones on e-commerce because there's a lot of different pages. But the more simple one, like we're building, gives you a good start, especially if you're a beginner, to get an understanding of what navigation is. And so we're going to add these links. We've got home, about, services, and contact. Like so. And we'll see that there, a list of links. And I'll mention, we're wrapping this with a nav element. That adds some semantic meaning to the browser for, SEO, search crawlers, gives you just a better idea for users what exactly this element is, and it's a nav element. It will, if we could use a div. A div is more of a basic element. You'll see that nothing's changed, but the benefit of using something more specific like nav gives a bit more context to what exactly this element is in the browser, and so that's why we're using it. We're using unordered list because order doesn't matter, so you can rearrange any of these links, and overall the concept's the same. If you had a list or a recipe list, for instance, ordered steps, you're going to want to use an ordered list instead of an unordered list. So because the order matters in that case. So this is all we need for the HTML. We are using this hashtag just because we don't want to put a link here. We're not going to be building out a website. It's just just a placeholder, and you'll see if we click on it, nothing happens. There's just a little hashtag there. Okay. So now we can go ahead and go to the CSS in sandbox.css, and to essentially link up our external style sheet, we want to use the link tag. We're going to specify href to essentially, there's 2 attributes. There's href and there's rel for relationship. We're going to say, hey, where's this file? Well, it's sandbox.css. Where is it located? In our folder. And then we're saying, hey, what is the relationship this file has to our HTML? And it's a style sheet, so we specify that here. And then we're good to go. So that's it for the HTML, super easy. The next part is the CSS, and how we want to approach this is essentially working our way outwards from outer elements to inward elements. And then within CSS selectors, within those CSS rule sets, we want to also work our way inward as well. So it's not just moving from body to nav to unordered list to link as we're working our way down. We also can think of the individual rule sets and think about, working our way inward from margin to border to padding to text color. And, that's a way to approach your CSS if you're wondering how to, get started. So we're going to, start with a universal selector. We're going to say box sizing, border box, margin, 0, and padding, 0. You'll see here, this is, myself working inward. We're using border box. That essentially makes it for all of the elements to, consider for the width of a box, consider the border size, the padding, the margin, all of that's going to be factored in, with border box versus, without. So, we're going to, consider that for border box. And then, we've got margin 0, padding 0, just resetting things. This universe selector is kind of like a CSS reset. You'll find a lot of those on the internet. You can just copy and paste that, add that to your CSS. And what that does is it neutralizes the styles from the browser. This is more of a simplified version of that, what we're doing, but you can have more of an advanced one you can add to your project. And so that's what we're doing here. We're just resetting all of the different browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, just resetting all that so we can, have the same look and feel across those browsers. Perfect. Okay, so now we want to move to the body. That's the first outer element, and we're just working our way inward essentially. So body first. To do a CSS selector or a CSS rule set is, the selector, curly braces, and then the different individual rules, which is a declaration followed by a value. And so we're going to say for the body, well, let's first add a font family. I like to think of those, more holistic, broader styles first, and then you can kind of work your way inward with like margin, border, padding, etc. But we can start with, using, Arial, and we'll just use sans serif today. Arial and sans serif. And then we're going to say background color. We want to grab the color we're going to be using for the body. So we got the font, we got the background, and we want to add some, padding. Let's just add some padding to the body. Now we're going to add the nav. That's the next element. We're just working our way inward again. Body, now we're on nav. And we can go ahead and give this a background color of white. And we're going to give it some padding of 10 pixels and 20 pixels. And you'll see that start to take shape. So padding 10 pixels. We have 10 pixels top and bottom, and then 20 pixels left and right. And so that's what you're seeing here, top and bottom, left and right. And we can, let's go ahead and just add this here so we can see it as we're working. Okay. The next thing we want to add is, we can add a border radius. So the border radius is going to be, currently it's very blocky. If you look at the final solution, you'll see a little curve at each endpoint, and we're going to add that here. So border radius, 6 pixels, like so. So it'll give a little bit of a curve. And then we're going to add a box shadow, and we're going to say, 0, 2 pixels, 6 pixels, RGBA, 0, 0, 0. We're adding a black, essentially, red, green, blue, 0, 0, 0. And then 0.1 is going to be the opacity. And so, that essentially means 90% transparent, 0.1 is the opacity. And so that's what we're adding here, is a little bit of a box shadow. The 2 pixels, should be, the Y value of the spread downwards. And then the 6 pixels, what we're doing is the spread. So how far, how much of a spread you want for the shadow. And so that's what we're adding. We're just doing 2 and 6. And then, we can add max width. Currently, it takes up the full space. You'll see that also, in the browser, it takes up the full width. We don't really want that. We actually want just, 600 pixels of a size. So we're going to shrink that down, and you'll see that as well. It's shrunk. Okay, and then we're going to, you'll see that it's not centered. A great way to center elements is going to be with margin auto. And so we're saying, top and bottom is 0, no margin, but then auto left and right. So left and right, and that's what we're centering. Great. Okay. Now we can move to the next element. We're moving our way down, so it's unordered list now. and we're going to, we'll see these bullets. We want to get rid of those. So we'll say list style none. That's gone. We'll say display. It's currently vertical. We want to make this horizontal, as in the solution. And a great way to do that is with flex. You can build a whole site with flex. So there's flex and there's grid. Grid, you can use for more complex organization, like an e-commerce site for a different list of products. But you can do a lot with flex, and so that's what we're going to use today to organize boxes or elements on our page. So display flex is going to essentially make all of these items fall down to a row, and we're going to say justify. So we're going to say display flex. We're going to say justify content center. This is a really common one you're going to use, so be sure to memorize that. Justify content center is going to center from left to right. It's going to put it in the middle. You also have align items, which is going to align or center elements from top to bottom. So justify center left to right, align items top to bottom. If you use flex direction column, everything's reverse. So now justify content is going to center from top to bottom, and align items is going to center from left to right. So just something to keep in mind. We're just using justify center today. Okay, now another cool thing is we're adding gap. So gap at 20 pixels is going to space out our links. The cool thing about gap is, unlike padding, which is going to add space on the left side, pretty much on both sides of an element, gap is only going to space between elements. And so that's really helpful if you're spacing things out and you might be finding yourself getting frustrated because of the spacing's having an issue. Gap is one to consider where it's just spacing between elements. And so that's what we're adding there. Now we can move on to the link, and that's what we're going to be styling today. So, or one of the final elements we're going to be styling, and we're going to say position relative. We're using position relative because we want the underline effect later on to be positioned absolute based on whatever element is relative. So that's how position absolute works, and we want it to be based on the link element. So that's why we're specifying position relative at this time. Text decoration, we want to get rid of this, underline underneath the links. We don't have that in the final solution. We'll say none. We will say, hey, let's change this color to gray, a dark gray. And then we want to say, hey, let's make this a little bit bolder. We're just going to say 600, like so. Then we're going to say padding bottom 4 pixels. And we can just add some padding. That's going to, also give room for the underline effect that we're adding. And then we're going to say transition color 0.3 seconds or 300 milliseconds and ease. And we're going to cover that pretty shortly here. We're going to say use a pseudo class of hover. And we're going to go ahead and add this color here that we want to add this color here. And you'll see when we hover, the text changes the color to this raspberry that I chose for today. You will notice, if we remove transition, if we remove it, you'll see it's a bit more jarring, it's a bit more immediate, and so adding the transition slows it down. And you'll see, essentially for a transition to work, it's one of the intros to animations, but transition is going to be based on a change in the browser, and that could be, this change in color that we're using. So to use a transition, you want to put it on the original element, so in this case the link, and we're saying, the original color is going to be this dark gray. When we hover, it's going to change to this, and then we want to mess with the middle part of how to get from here, so point A to point B is that transition. And so we're saying, 300 milliseconds for the duration, make this last 300 milliseconds, and transition from dark gray to the raspberry red, and then ease. Ease is a lot kind of similar to ease in and out, slightly different, but for the most part it's the same. And then that's where we get that transition. And so as a final step, we want to add that underline effect, and that's what we're going to cover now. And so we're going to use for that, we're going to use a pseudo element. So we use, for hover is a pseudo class. This is for a pseudo element. a pseudo element is for content. And so that's why it's required to use a content declaration. And you can say like, hello, and you'll see that here. So using the pseudo element of after manipulates content that comes after the element. You can also say before, and this could be helpful for like if you want to add an icon before elements, you can, this is going to manipulate content before the element. And then you also have other types of pseudo elements that manipulate the content within the element, but we're just using before or after. Either will work for this effect that we're doing, so it does not matter. You can use either one. We're going to use after in this case. We're going to switch it to position absolute, like I mentioned earlier. Position absolute, it's now going to get rid of, or we still have that text, we're going to get rid of it. Position absolute, it's going to take it out of the flow. And so we can actually, let's just make it an empty string. That's what we need for now. Position absolute, we want to say left 0, bottom 0. Width, we can say 10 pixels just so you can see it for now. And we can say height. Height is going to be 2 pixels. And we're going to give it, let's give it a background color so you can see this. It should be the same like so. There. Okay, so let's explain what we just did. So you saw earlier the text being after home, about, services, content, after the element. We moved it to position absolute, so it went out of the flow, and we said, hey, put it in the left bottom corner with left 0, bottom 0, make it a width of 10 pixels, and give it a height of 2 pixels, and that's why you're seeing that line. You also see it with the color. So essentially we're making an element. We're creating our own element with the width and the height and adding color. Kind of like we're just making our own line, our own underline. For this to work, we're going to change it instead to width 0, and then we're going to then add the transition, which is where all the magic happens. So to do this, we're going to say, hey, a hover, a hover, and then we're going to add the pseudo element of after. And then we're going to say width 100%, like so. And so now when we hover, you'll see that line goes from 0 to 100, 0 to 100, 0 to 100, 0 to 100. To make that actually turn into that effect, we're adding that transition, like I talked about. So transition width 0.3 seconds, ease, and that's it. And then you'll see it here. So like so, and let's just run through this really quick so you really understand it. We use position absolute to put the line, relative to the text underneath, left bottom. That's what that's doing. In the left bottom corner, we're saying, hey, start at a width of 0, and then end when you hover at a width of 100. And so that's what shows that line that we just created. From getting from point A to point B, from the 0 width to 100% width, we are saying, hey, let's make the transition be taking place. We have 300 milliseconds, and then using ease as our timing function. And so that's what's happening here when we hover. And that's it. Perfect. And so that is how to build out a transition. That's a stepping stone to get into animations. Animations, the only difference really for that is going to be with you have a keyframe, and then you have your keyframes, and then you have the animation declaration. So transition has to be required usually by an action taking place, and animations you've got you don't need an action to take place like a hover effect by the user. You can just do an animation just with the keyframes by specifying what is this animation, and then using the animation declaration to do exactly what we're doing for the transition. Animation is going to look pretty similar to transition. It's just going to have a little bit extra functionality, but the only difference is we're using keyframes, of course, with the animations to actually build out what we're creating. So that's it. Again, this is going to be useful for for letting users know that they can click on something. Adding these animations, they're not required by any means. You can build out a website without any of this and still make it look good, but it's great to add these little effects. So thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more to come. I plan on adding more videos specifically about building out different navigations, more complex ones as well. So stay tuned, and I appreciate you watching. Have a great rest of your day.